What's up, guys? This is Coach Grant with First Down Training, and today we're going to be breaking down 5 different wide receiver press releases that you can use. We're going to be talking about when you can use the press release, the technique behind the press release, and then the name of it so you guys can remember it. So I hope this video helps you guys out. Hope it could teach you a few new things. But also, fellas, if you're a wide receiver and you would like to train with us this offseason, we're going to be coming out to 15 different cities across the U.S. for two-day long QB and wide receiver camps. Next up, we're going to be coming out to San Francisco, Miami, Las Vegas, Charlotte, Portland, Dallas, Nashville, Chicago, Buffalo, Atlanta, Houston, Philly, Detroit, Boise, and Los Angeles. So each one of these fellas, it's a 2-day long training camp, 8 hours of training total. So if you would like to train with us and we are coming to a city near you, check out that very first link in the description below. We'd love to have you out there. Let's get started with this video. So first release we're going to be going over here is from DK Metcalf. His route running has improved tremendously from just last year to the first, 2-3 weeks of the NFL this year. And this release that we're going over is called a dive release. So a dive release is something that you could use, honestly, you could pretty much use it on any route except maybe like a slant or like a quick out route, but you could use this against a head up press coverage DB or a DB who's lined up inside shade. So a dive release is pretty much exactly how it sounds. You are going to be diving to the inside, essentially running full speed, trying to make this DB think that we are running a drag. So a lot of you guys might be familiar with the basic release called a diamond release, right? So a diamond release is something you would use like if you had to run a slant route, you had a DB inside shade, what would you do? You would attack his outside shoulder and outside hip for 3 steps, trying to get him to flip to the fade so we could slip back underneath. So let's say, for example, you have to run a fade, or in Metcalf's case, he's running a dig, or you could use this on maybe, a comeback route or an out route. We're trying to get this guy to flip his hips and commit to the drag. So when we're trying to do that, it comes down to the same exact things. We have to sell this dive release. So that means we have to run hard. That means I can't be taking choppy steps because nobody runs a drag route with choppy steps. They just get across the field right now, so that's how I have to be. Another thing when you do this dive release, to get this DB to commit, you got to have your hips and your shoulders committed to the inside as well. Because when a DB is in press man-to-man coverage, you're going to hear me talk about this a lot throughout this video with the other 4 releases that we're going over. His eyes are supposed to be watching our hips, reading our body language, so that's what I have to commit with. So now, when it comes down to steps on this, it's a little bit weird because you obviously have to run to the inside, but let's say your inside foot is up like Metcalf has right here. There's a couple ways you can do this, right? So you could either go straight from your stance into the dive release. So you could either just take your right foot and come across and then plant off of your left foot in this case, then slip back out, taking 2 steps, right? Or what you could do is you could take like kind of a little bit of a prep step, if you will. So you take like a jab step with the front foot, then you would go right, cut off of the left. So that's like almost like 3 steps. Or what Metcalf does is he kind of does this like plant step or jab step with his back foot, and he runs it like a 3-step release, which is similar to the diamond release. So he plants with the back foot, then he goes left, right, left. Now, when we get that DB to commit his hips, it's very important for me to take this outside release. I can't be afraid to use my hands. You got to think about press coverage. Like a lot of people ask us about hand technique. What should you do if the DB tries to get physical and tries to get hands on us off the line of scrimmage? You got to have a plan for your hands, right? But your plan should be simple. We should not be thinking, oh, I'm going to swat, then rip, swat, then swim. Yeah, it's what you want to do, but your mindset needs to be, I want to beat whatever hand prevents me from getting the release that I'm trying to do. So what type of release is he trying to do here? He's trying to take an outside release, right? This DB's lined up inside shade, and he has to run a dig route. If Metcalf were to just force the inside release here, this DB would keep his leverage. He'd get hands on him and squeeze him to the inside. No spacing. And because the DB was able to get hands, that would mess up timing with the quarterback. So what he does, he's thinking, okay, I'm going to attack him to the inside with this dive release, try to make him think or try to make him protect his leverage. That's why it's so important to attack his leverage, because the DB's got to protect his leverage. Whenever he's shaded to the inside, he's taught don't give up the inside. So let's make him think we're running there. That's the best way to get him to move. So when we do that, we know we want to take an outside release. The only hand of the DB that could prevent us from the outside release is not his right hand, it's going to be his left hand. So if I have a plan to swat his left hand by swatting the back of his shoulder, especially Metcalf, I mean, this guy's a freak of nature, so he has a very easy time with this. There's not too many DBs who are going to be stronger or bigger than him. But you want to try to attack a point of control. Point of control would be the back of the shoulder, the back of the hip, or the back of the elbow/forearm. If you can swat that, That's going to get you off of that press. And so what? Let's say he recovers with this hand. So what? I'm off the press, I'm maintaining timing, and I'm maintaining spacing, which can allow me to stack and get separation at the top of the route. Guys, our releases do not get us open. Our releases help us create space, and our releases or spacing, I should say, and it helps us stay on time with my quarterback. So his first release is a dive release, 2 to 3 hard steps to the inside, selling the drag. Use this against head up or inside shade press when we were trying to take an outside release. So now, next release we're going to be talking about here is going to be from Jalen Waddle, and he is going to be running this so-called like slide and go release. So I'm going to play this thing full speed and then we'll break it down. This is a great release if you are a wide receiver who is on the faster side of things. If you're on the slower side of things, I don't think this is a bad release for you to use, but it's definitely easier when you are a quicker wide receiver. So let's play this full speed. So he comes off the ball, this little slide, takes off to the outside, and is able to get a step on this DB and win on this like kind of fade route, slot fade route, if you will. So now, what is this slide and go release? So I'm sure all of you guys have probably seen the hesitation slide release before, where you come off the ball, you slide to the outside. Let's say the DB starts to jump, you give him a fake outside, and you run like a slant, or you run like a 5-yard in, or whatever it is. You run something quick to the inside. This release builds off of that. Something that all great route runners are able to do is they're able to make the releases that they look super similar, right? A guy I like to use as an example because we all can understand this and we've all seen highlights of him would be Davante Adams, right? He doesn't do this exact release because there's many different releases that you could use. But what does he do? He'll have a DB lined up. Let's say this is him right here. He'll do this little hezzy skip. DB shades to the outside, bam, he goes to the inside. DB shades inside, bam, he goes to the outside. He could run a fade, right? And I'm sure with Aaron Rodgers, it was like almost an option route. Hey, if he jumps, I'm going to run a slant. If he stays inside, I'm going to go run a fade. Because a lot of offenses, especially at that high of a level, all their routes are based off of options. So you want to use that to your advantage. How can I make my releases look similar? Because you don't want to have, any more than 5 releases, fellas. 5 to 6, I would say. But they all can build off of each other. So maybe Waddle has used this before. Maybe he's used it on film before. He does this slide to the outside. DB kind of sits to the inside. Because this is what DBs are taught, fellas, because they've seen okay, if you're lined up inside leverage like this DB kind of is, or he's kind of, I would guess you could say outside or head up, if you will. This slide release could work really against any leverage. But this DB is taught if he's head up, man-to-man coverage, don't get beat to the inside, right? So we slide to the outside, he stays patient. He wants to hold that leverage. He's expecting a slant. DBs are literally taught this. When you see this slide to the outside, be patient, sit to the inside. Expect the slant route. So we could use that to our advantage when I have this fade or an outside breaking route. I want to slide. I want to use the same exact tempo, and then I take off, and then I go beat him with speed. Because if we just get him to hold to the inside, if you have a talented quarterback who could be accurate with the ball, all we need is a step on this guy to win on this slide and go. Now, we talked about the name of it. We talked about the technique, when to use it, or we talked about when to use it. Now let's talk about the technique of it, right? So something that helps you slide to the outside, because you got to make this DB make a decision when you do this slide release, right? So you don't want to do this slide release and go completely flat, because when you go flat, if this DB sits to the inside, you still got to push up vertical. And what could he do? He could cut you off on that angle and just squeeze you to the sideline. You want to try to attack at his almost outside shoulder and outside hip. Let's make him make a decision. Because if you go at his outside shoulder and his outside hip, he's got a decision to make right here. Should he stay patient and keep the leverage, or should he open up the gate and run with us and play the fade, right? Now, if I have a fade, I obviously want to make it look as much like a slant as possible. If I have a slant, I want to make it look as much like a fade as possible. So we have to make that same release, or both of those releases, look the same. They have to look identical, because that's when we can start getting into this DB's head. So to help you attack on that 45 and gain some ground, Waddle uses something off the line called a kick step. So a kick step is where your back foot kicks behind your front foot. Now, a lot of old school receiver coaches will say that this type of step right here is a false step. That is incorrect. That is not a false step. This is a part of the release. He is loading up his hips so he can explode off the line, right? A lot of guys just try to do this slide release from a flat-footed position and they just slide. You have no energy. You have no explosion. You have no burst off the ball. Now, do you have to kick step to get that? Because when you, and honestly, if you've never done the kick step, I suggest trying it, because you might think how is that going to help me with speed? Best advice I can give you is try it. Try that before you get into release. You loading up your hips just gives you so much more explosion off the ball. But maybe you don't want to take a kick step. Maybe you'd rather take a jab step. That's totally fine. So you give a quick move inside. It's almost like you're stepping in place and you're pushing off the front foot that gets you into this slide. So that would be totally fine as well. But this slide and go release is a great way to have that DB kind of sit patient, expect a slant so we could get a step and win on that fade. Now, that slide release can also be used. It's used in a few different things, right? So this is what this next release we're going to be talking about here is. So remember, we talked about the regular old slide, DB jumps, we give him a quick move, and we run a slant. Then we talk about, okay, DB's going to sit inside, I slide, and then I take off and go run a fade. Now, maybe I could go one step further. I could slide to the outside, take 3 hard steps, DB thinks fade, and then I slip under him. So this is a longer developing release, so you want to make sure that you use this in the right type of situation. This means you want to use it if the quarterback is doing like an RPO. I hope a lot of you know what an RPO means. RPO is a run pass option. So he's doing a zone read. Maybe he's reading an outside linebacker. You have press coverage. You know that the play takes a little while. You know the quarterback's not just taking one step and throwing it, so you can be a little more patient with your release. Or, for example, let's say you're running a 5-yard in, because you could also use this on a 5-yard in, but let's say you're backside. Let's say the play concept is like, okay, let's say on the front side of the play, it's like a smash concept, right? And then let's say backside, the slot receiver's running a post and you're coming underneath on this 5-yard in. So you're like the backside read, right? So you have some time, but you can still get the ball. You just don't want to get there too quick. You want to get there timed up with the quarterback's drop. And that's what this release is for. But again, it builds off of the last one that we discussed. So this would be called a slide diamond release. So you see how he comes off the ball, slides, 1, 2, 3, gets that DB to flip his hips, and he's able to slip back underneath and win on this slant route. Ball was a little late. Receiver obviously makes a hell of a catch right here. So let's talk about it. So remember how we talked about we got to make this DB make a decision. You want to use this release when he is inside shade or head up in press coverage, and you have to run that inside 5-yard in or slant, longer developing play. We do not want to use this when it is quick game, quarterbacks taking one step and throwing. But watch what he does with his front foot. Remember I was talking about that kick step or that prep step? You see how he takes that jab step with his front foot. That jab step is to push off the ball and create some explosion. So he jabs at the inside foot, bam, pushes off the ball. That gets him into the slide. He's attacking vertical. DB's trying to stay patient right here. And again, that's what DBs are taught to do. You see that slide to the outside, expect the slant, right? Expect the slant, protect your leverage. So we got to make it look the exact same. We slide, then he takes off. 1, 2, and this is very similar to that DK Metcalf release. Just now he's going to the outside, not breaking to the inside. Fellas, releases should be simple. You don't need to do the complex, crazy things. You just need to keep it simple, and you need to make it look similar, and the goal is always to get that DB to overcommit. Flip his hips and open up the gate. So when we do that slide, we are patient, and then when we take off to the outside, we're running fast. We're running in full stride. Nobody runs a fade with choppy steps, fellas. Let's open up the stride and run, and your hips and your shoulders, aka your body language, has to say that it's a fade, so we could slip under that DB and able to get separation on that route. So I want to play this thing again, full speed one more time. So remember, this is a slide diamond release. It looks a lot like that slide and go release. And again, it builds off of that hezzy slide that we could use on just a regular slant, a regular fade, or a backside slant. Okay, so now, next example here is going to be from DK Metcalf. Again, we talk a lot about how much his route running has improved in the last year because he's already making highlights just 3 weeks into the season, right? So this is a release when you have a DB who's a little bit more patient. And honestly, I would just call this a closed space release. I don't really think there's so much of a name for it. Some people might call this a foot fire release. If you're fine with calling it a foot fire release, that helps you remember it, that is totally fine. But this is a release for when you have a patient DB. So when you come up to the line of scrimmage, and you have a DB who's maybe 2 yards away, right? So like 2 yards away, he's playing something called catch technique. So what catch technique is he wants Metcalf's running a fade route right here, right? And honestly, this would be the same idea if you had to run a post, a corner, a dig, an out route. It's literally the same concept. So this works for any given route, except maybe like a quick slant, okay? Don't forget anything past 5 yards, let's say. So you got a DB who's 2 yards away. What he wants you to do is on like, let's use the fade route because that's what he runs. He wants us to just try to think, okay, I have space between him. forget about the release. I'm just going to try to run around him. Because if we just try to run around him, that's exactly what the DB wants. He's going to get hands and he's going to squeeze us to the sideline, essentially catching us at that point of contact where he makes hands. So on that type of coverage, he is taught, like, because what are we taught as receivers when there is space between the two of us? We are taught to close the space. Let's go close the cushion. Let's step on the DB's toes. Let's make him uncomfortable and give him a fake in one direction. We want to step on his toes because let's say I give him an inside fake and he jumps. I'm closer to him, so it's easier for me to stack. Stacking means getting back over the top where that DB is trailing behind us. Now, what DBs are taught in this catch technique is that when a wide receiver starts to come off the ball in closed space, you are taught to motor back or inch back. And you want to keep that space because eventually this receiver has to commit to his route. He does not have all day. So that's kind of like the beauty of the DB position right here. You got to, eventually that wide receiver's got to go and we could get hands and catch. So anytime you come off the ball, I recommend doing this release. Metcalf starts at a slow pace, then he quickens up the pace, closes the space, continues to close the distance, and is able to win on that fade route. So let's talk about it, right? So he comes off the ball, sees the DB starts to inch back, but he continues to close the space. He continues to attack. He doesn't leave this room and then just try to run around him. So I would consider this like a flip fire crossover, a close the distance crossover, whatever it is. But it's whenever that DB starts to inch back and wants to play that catch technique, do not run away from him. Do not try to run around from him. If you feel like you got to get up into your route, like you come off the ball, like, and I think Metcalf maybe could have done a better job of this, especially because of how big he is right here. But he comes off the ball, you got space, and you see this guy start to inch back. Let's go close the space faster. Because guys, when you have a DB who's backpedaling, you are faster than him 100% of the time. So he wants to inch back and keep space. Let's quicken up the tempo that I have on this. Let's go a little bit faster. Let's run at him and step on his toes and make him uncomfortable before I get up into my route. Just do not try to run around him. That is exactly what he wants when he is trying to be patient. Let's play this thing full speed one more time. So see how Metcalf's patient, closes the space, gives that crossover, and is able to win. Now, next release we're going to be talking about here is for a situation when a DB is outside shade, and honestly, you could use this release on pretty much any given route, which is the beauty of this release. Now, this release is called a wide step release. So it's pretty much exactly how it sounds. You are going to be stepping always with your back foot on a wide step. You are stepping with your back foot to the outside, trying to make this DB think that we are doing a speed release fade. We want him to jump to the outside and protect his leverage so we could take the inside release. Now, Odell uses this on a fade route. Now, fellas, you can't do this if you have an MOR fade. What an MOR is a mandatory outside release. So if you have a mandatory outside release, you got to come up with something different. But if it's a fade situation where you could take an inside release as long as you stack, absolutely can use this. Do you want to use this on a dig or a post? Absolutely. Could you use this on a 10-yard out? Absolutely. Because remember, this DB's outside shade for a reason. Prevent the outside release. Force everything inside where he has some kind of help. So you got to take what he gives you. If you try to force this outside release, he's going to get hands. He's going to force you to the sideline, disrupts timing, and you won't have any spacing on your outside breaking route or your fade. So you got to take what he gives you. And this wide step release is great for that. So let's play this thing full speed. So Odell kind of does this little kick step with the back foot. It's not so much a kick step. I would consider it more of a punch step, and then he's able to win on this fade route. So like we said, wide step release is exactly how it sounds. You see how he takes this little prep with his front foot? It's not a big step. It's almost like in place, but this creates energy. This allows him to push off of this front foot, off the middle arch, so he can throw his hip and throw this step into this DB's leverage. And you see how with this step, he is attacking vertically. That is what we want on this wide step. Like we said, anytime there is space between me and the DB, I want to close the space and I want to try to step onto his toes. So we come off the ball here. You see, like if we had a DB who was right up on the line, we wouldn't need to step vertical like that. He's right up in my face. I take this little prep step. I could step a little bit more lateral and probably get him to jump. But since I have some space, if I step lateral off the line and my foot stops like right where I'm drawing this line, yeah, the DB might jump, but we still got to take the inside release and he could cut us off. So we got to get to his toes. So that little prep step allows him to push and throw and step vertical, closing the space, still threatening his leverage, gets that DB to hold, and he's able to take that free inside release. Remember, our releases, fellas, do not get a separation. They keep timing with the quarterback, and they allow us to create spacing for the quarterback to have an easier throw. So a wide step release is a great release to use when you have outside shade press. You're a quick read on the route, right? Because again, you could give some kind of hesitation move, give a crossover go, but that might take too long. A wide step is a quick one-step release that you could use versus that outside shade press coverage DB. Great job there by Odell. Restacking too. Restacking is an absolute must, especially when you take an inside release on an outside route. All right, fellas, I really want to thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to leave those in the comment section below. Always appreciate the feedback. It's always great to hear from you guys. And again, fellas, we're coming out, like we said, to 15 more cities across the country for two-day long QB and wide receiver training camps. So check out that very first link in the description below. Coming all the way from Charlotte, North Carolina to Atlanta, Philly, all over the place, you guys. So if you're local to one of these cities, we'd love to have you out. Very first link in that description below. I'll see you guys next time.